The moment I knew everything was about to detonate came during the third quarter investor call, when Marcus Holloway, the CEO's 32-year-old son who'd been appointed chief investment officer 6 months earlier, leaned back in his her chair and said, "Your signature means nothing now, darling. I'm restructuring this deal, and you're no longer part of the team." I was on mute. Video off. Listening from my home office while Marcus systematically dismantled the $300 million infrastructure project I'd spent 18 months building from scratch. He didn't know I was on the call. He thought I'd been removed from the participant list, but I'd been invited by someone else. Someone who suspected exactly what Marcus was planning and wanted me to hear it firsthand. "Frankly," Marcus continued, voice full of casual arrogance, "Jennifer did the preliminary groundwork, but this deal needs sophisticated leadership to close. I'll be taking point from here. She can transition back to her previous role. Like I was an analyst being demoted after a failed project. Not the senior vice president of strategic development who'd conceived this deal, negotiated with every stakeholder, and structured every component of the financing." I didn't unmute, didn't interrupt. Just listened as Marcus explained to our investors how he planned to optimize my deal structure by removing several key provisions I'd fought for months to include. Provisions that protected our minority investors. Provisions that ensured community benefit requirements. Provisions that made this deal more than just a profit grab. He was gutting everything that made the project defensible and replacing it with pure financial engineering designed to maximize short-term returns. And the investors were eating it up. Because Marcus spoke their language. Growth, deal, returns, aggressive timelines. He sounded confident, decisive, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't, but he'd learned to fake it convincingly. When the call ended, I sat in my home office staring at my computer screen. 3 years of my life at Holloway Industries. 18 months on this specific project. And I'd just been erased in 45 minutes by the CEO's son who wanted a trophy deal to justify his executive title. Most people would have started updating their resume, started calling recruiters, started planning their exit. I did something different. I opened my safe, pulled out a legal document I'd filed away 2 years earlier, read it carefully, made sure I remembered every clause correctly, and then I smiled. Because Marcus had just made the most expensive mistake of his career. Let me back up and explain how I ended up with what I privately called my nuclear option. My name is Jennifer Blackwell. I joined Holloway Industries 4 years ago as Director of Strategic Development. Holloway Industries is a mid-sized infrastructure investment firm. We identify large-scale development projects, structure financing, coordinate stakeholders, and manage long-term returns. When I joined, the company was run by Robert Holloway, the founder. Sharp, ethical, and genuinely respected in the industry. He built Holloway Industries over 30 years through careful relationship building and solid execution. Robert had one weakness. His son, Marcus. Marcus had bounced between jobs after college. Tech startup that failed. Consulting role he quit after 8 months. A brief stint in private equity that ended badly. Each time Robert would console him, help him network into the next opportunity, and hope this one would stick. Finally, 2 years ago, Robert decided to bring Marcus into the family business. Started him in business development. Light responsibilities. Mostly networking and relationship management. Things Marcus was actually decent at when he bothered to try. But Marcus didn't want to be decent at entry-level work. He wanted his father's position. Wanted the respect Robert had earned over 3 decades, but without the decades of earning it. So he started positioning himself as Robert's successor, talking to board members about generational transition, suggesting to investors that he was being groomed for leadership, making it clear he expected to inherit control of Holloway Industries. Robert unfortunately encouraged this. He was in his late 60s, starting to think about retirement, and he wanted to believe his son could step into his role. I watched this dynamic with growing concern. Because Marcus wasn't qualified. He was clever enough to sound competent in meetings. Charismatic enough to charm investors initially. But he lacked the judgment, patience, and ethical grounding that made Robert effective. And Marcus particularly resented me. Because I was younger than him, more successful than him, and had Robert's genuine respect in a way Marcus never had. Robert valued my work, gave me increasing responsibility, brought me into high-level discussions, treated me as a key strategic leader. Marcus saw me as competition, someone blocking his path to inheriting the company, someone who needed to be diminished or removed. Our conflict came to a head about 2 years ago over something that seemed minor at the time but ended up being critical. We were negotiating a partnership deal with a municipal authority. Complex financing structure involving multiple stakeholders. I'd been leading the side negotiation for 8 months. The deal required unanimous board approval to proceed. Standard corporate governance. All board members had to vote yes for us to commit the capital. During one board meeting, Marcus objected to a provision I'd included that gave minority investors enhanced information rights. He argued it was unnecessary and would slow decision-making. I explained that the provision was essential for attracting certain institutional investors who required transparency protections. Marcus pushed back, said I was being too cautious, too worried about accommodating minor stakeholders. Robert, surprisingly, sided with me, said transparency protections were good practice and aligned with company values. The board approved the deal with my provisions intact. Marcus voted against it, made a show of his dissent, wanted everyone to know he disagreed with my approach. After the meeting, Robert pulled me aside. Jennifer, I want to discuss something sensitive with you, okay? Marcus is frustrated. He feels like he's not being taken seriously, not being given real authority. And he's particularly frustrated about deals where you're leading, and he's not. Robert, I'm not trying to compete with Marcus. I'm just doing my job. I know. And you're doing it well. But I need to think about succession. Marcus is my son. Eventually he'll have a significant role in this company. And I need to make sure that when that happens, key people like you don't feel undermined. What are you suggesting? He hesitated. I'm suggesting that I want to protect the people who've helped build this company, who embody the values I care about. And I want to make sure that even after I'm no longer in day-to-day control, those people have a voice. He pulled out a document. I've been working with our legal team on a new governance structure. It includes provisions for proxy voting rights on major deals. Essentially, for critical strategic decisions, certain key executives would hold proxy rights that allow them to vote on behalf of stakeholder interests, even if they're not on the board. Why would you do that? Because I'm worried about what happens when I'm not here to balance Marcus's instincts. He's my son, and I love him, but he's impulsive. He prioritizes short-term wins over long-term relationships. And I've built this company on long-term relationships. He slid the document across the table. This is a proxy agreement. It grants you irrevocable voting rights on any deal you've personally structured where the total capital commitment exceeds $100 million. The proxy can't be revoked without your written consent and board supermajority approval. I read through it carefully. It was exactly what he described. Essentially, for any major deal I built, I maintained voting control over critical decisions, even if I was removed from the project team. Robert, this is unusual. Why are you giving me this much authority? Because you've earned it. And because I trust your judgment more than I trust my own son's. That's hard to admit, but it's true. Marcus will eventually have control of this company. This proxy ensures that on the deals that really matter, decisions still require your approval. This will make Marcus furious if he ever finds out. He won't find out unless he tries to do something that triggers it. And if he does trigger it, that's exactly the kind of situation where I want you to have authority. I signed the agreement. Robert signed. It was witnessed, notarized, and filed with the corporate records. Standard legal document. Completely enforceable. And then I filed it away and hoped I'd never need to use it. For 18 months, I didn't think about the proxy agreement. I was too busy building the Riverside infrastructure project. $300 million. Public-private partnership. New transportation corridor that would revitalize an underserved region while generating steady long-term returns for investors. I'd conceived the project, identified the opportunity, built relationships with the municipal authorities, structured the financing across multiple tranches, negotiated with unions, coordinated environmental reviews, secured commitments from institutional investors. It was the most complex deal of my career. And it was working. Robert was thrilled. Called it the best strategic work Holloway Industries had ever done. Said it represented exactly the kind of values-driven development he'd always wanted the company to pursue. Marcus hated it. He thought it was too slow, too complicated, too focused on community benefit instead of pure financial returns. But he couldn't touch it, because Robert was still CEO, still had final authority. And Robert protected the deal. Then 3 months ago, Robert had a heart attack, serious enough to require surgery. Recovery time projected at 3 to 4 months. The board appointed Marcus as acting CEO during Robert's recovery. That's when everything changed. Marcus immediately started reviewing my deal, questioning provisions, suggesting modifications, bringing in outside consultants who agreed with whatever he wanted them to say. I pushed back, showed him why each component was necessary, demonstrated that changing the structure would lose investor confidence and potentially collapse the deal. Marcus didn't care. He wanted the deal, restructured his way, wanted to put his stamp on it, wanted to show the board he could lead major transactions. 2 weeks ago, he made his move, called me into his office. New office. Robert's office, which Marcus had moved into immediately after becoming acting CEO. Jennifer, I've been thinking about Riverside. Great preliminary work. Really solid foundation. But I think it's time to bring in more experienced leadership to close this out. Marcus, I've been leading this deal for 18 months. I have relationships with every stakeholder. Changing leadership now would be disruptive and could collapse investor confidence. I appreciate your perspective, but I've decided to bring in a senior advisor. Thomas Cartwright. You know him, right? I knew him, Dell. Former investment banker. Aggressive deal style. Focused purely on maximizing returns, regardless of other considerations. Exactly the wrong person for this project. Thomas doesn't understand public-private partnerships. He's going to alienate our municipal partners. Thomas understands closing deals, which is what we need now. You'll transition to a support role. Thomas will lead negotiations from here. Marcus, this is a mistake. You're jeopardizing $300 million in committed capital. I'm optimizing a deal that's been moving too slowly. Jennifer, you're a talented strategist, but you lack the killer instinct needed to close at this level. I am making a business decision. Does the board know you're doing this? The board trusts my judgment. As acting CEO, I have authority over operational decisions. This is operational. He stood up. Meeting over. I'd been dismissed. I walked out of Robert's office, Marcus's office now, and I went directly to our corporate legal counsel. Asked for a copy of my proxy agreement. Confirmed it was still active and enforceable. Then I waited. Marcus moved fast. Within a week, he brought Thomas in and restructured the deal framework. Cut community benefit provisions. Reduced environmental protections. Restructured financing to prioritize short-term returns over long-term sustainability. The municipal partners were furious. Called me directly. Asked what was happening. Why was Holloway Industries abandoning the agreements we'd spent months negotiating? I told them I was no longer leading the deal. That they should direct questions to Marcus and Thomas. They did. And they didn't get satisfactory answers. Several partners started making noises about withdrawing from the project. Marcus panicked. Scheduled an emergency investor call to reassure everyone that the deal was on track. That the modifications were optimizations that would benefit everyone. That's the call where he said my signature meant nothing. The call where he didn't know I was listening. The call where he triggered my proxy rights. The follow-up investor meeting was scheduled for the following week. In person, this time. New York office. All major stakeholders. The goal was to present the restructured deal and get final approval to proceed. Marcus was confident. He'd rehearsed his presentation. Had Thomas backing him up with financial projections. Expected this to be his victory lap. The moment where he proved he could lead major transactions. I received a meeting invitation. Marked, optional. I wasn't presenting. Wasn't part of the core team anymore. Just invited as a courtesy because I'd done the preliminary work. I accepted. Confirmed my attendance. Marcus's assistant called me. Jennifer, you're really not needed at this meeting. Are you sure you want to fly to New York just to observe? I'm sure. I want to see how the deal closes. The meeting room was impressive. 43rd floor. Glass walls overlooking Manhattan. 15 people around a massive conference table. Our institutional investors. Their legal counsel. Our board members. Marcus at the head of the table. Thomas beside him. And me, sitting at the far end. Quiet. Observing. Marcus started his presentation. Confident. Polished. He'd learned to deliver these performances well. Talked about financial returns. Growth, projections. Aggressive timelines. The investors asked questions. Marcus handled them smoothly. Thomas jumped in with supporting data. Everything was proceeding exactly as Marcus had planned. He was 45 minutes into a 50-minute presentation. Almost at the finish line. Then David Morrison, legal counsel for our largest institutional investor, raised his hand. Before we proceed to approval, I have a procedural question. The original deal structure was developed by Jennifer Blackwell, correct? Marcus nodded. Jennifer did excellent preliminary work. We've built on her foundation. And the restructured deal represents material changes to the original framework she developed, optimizations, improvements that increase returns and reduce complexity. I understand. But my question is procedural. Under Holloway Industries governance documents, who holds final approval authority for this transaction? Marcus looked confused. The board approves major capital commitments. Standard corporate governance. That's typically true. But I've reviewed Holloway's corporate records as part of our due diligence. There's a proxy agreement filed 2 years ago granting specific voting rights on deals exceeding $100 million. This deal qualifies. So my question is, who holds the proxy? The room went very quiet. Marcus looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at the Holloway board members. One of the board members, Patricia Chen, pulled out her phone. Started searching through documents. Marcus's voice had lost its confidence. I'm not familiar with any proxy agreement. Dad never mentioned. It's filed in your corporate records, David said. Signed by Robert Holloway and another party. Grants irrevocable voting rights on major deals. Given the material changes you're proposing, the proxy holder would need to approve the restructuring. Patricia looked up from her phone, face pale. I found it. The proxy agreement. Signed 2 years ago. She looked down the table, directly at me. Jennifer, this proxy was granted to you? Every head in the room turned. 15 people staring at me. I nodded. That's correct. Marcus stood up. That's impossible. Dad would never. Robert filed it with corporate records. It's completely legal and enforceable. And when? Yes, it grants me voting rights on this deal because I structured it, and it exceeds the $100 million threshold specified in the agreement. This is insane. You're not even on the deal team anymore. That's irrelevant. The proxy isn't tied to my employment status or role. It's tied to the deal itself. Any material changes to a deal I structured require my approval. Thomas looked at Marcus. You didn't know about this? Of course I didn't know. She's sabotaging, David interrupted. Mr. Holloway, this isn't sabotage. This is corporate governance. If your father granted Jennifer proxy rights, those rights are valid regardless of whether you knew about them. The question now is whether Jennifer approves the restructured deal. Everyone looked at me again. I stood up, walked to the front of the room, stood directly across from Marcus. No, I said clearly. I do not approve the restructuring. The changes Marcus and Thomas have proposed violate the community benefit provisions I negotiated with our municipal partners. They compromise environmental protections that were conditions of regulatory approval. And they prioritize short-term returns over long-term sustainability in ways that will damage Holloway Industries' reputation and relationships. Marcus's face had gone red. You can't do this. You're destroying a $300 million deal out of spite. I'm protecting a $300 million deal from being destroyed by incompetent leadership. Marcus, you've spent 2 weeks dismantling agreements it took me 18 months to build. You've alienated municipal partners who are ready to walk away. You've ignored regulatory constraints that could kill this project entirely. And you've done all of this because you wanted a trophy deal you could claim credit for. Dad gave you that proxy to undermine me. Dad gave me that proxy to protect deals from exactly this situation. From impulsive leadership that doesn't understand the complexity of what's been built. And he was right to do it. Patricia spoke up. Jennifer, what would you need to approve moving forward? Restore the original deal structure. Reinstate the community benefit provisions. Maintain the environmental protections. And remove Marcus and Thomas from leadership of this project. I'll close the deal as originally structured. That's my condition for approval. None? Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Absolutely not. I'm acting CEO. I have authority. You have authority over operational matters, Patricia said quietly. But Jennifer has proxy rights over this specific deal. Those rights supersede your operational authority on matters related to the deal structure. Robert made sure of that when he granted the proxy. David looked around the room. I think we need a break. Let the Holloway board discuss this privately. Investors will wait for your decision, but I'll be frank. Our commitment is to the deal Jennifer structured. If that deal is substantially changed without her approval, we'll need to reevaluate our participation. 2 other investors nodded agreement. The meeting recessed. The Holloway board members went into a private conference room. Marcus followed them, still arguing. Thomas sat alone looking shell-shocked. I went to the building's coffee shop. Bought a latte. Sat by the window watching the city 40 floors below. My phone buzzed. Text from Patricia.Detail. Can you join us in the conference room? The boardroom was tense when I entered. 5 board members. Marcus, sitting separately, arms crossed. Patricia, at the head of the table. Jennifer, we've been discussing options. Marcus maintains that your proxy rights are being used to undermine his authority as acting CEO. My proxy rights exist specifically to check unilateral authority on major deals. That's their purpose. We understand. The board needs to make a decision. We can overrule your proxy with a supermajority vote. That's specified in the agreement. It would require 4 out of 5 board members to agree. She looked around the table. However, after reviewing the situation, I don't believe we have 4 votes to overrule you. The investors have made clear they prefer your deal structure. The municipal partners have expressed concerns about recent changes. And frankly, the modifications Marcus proposed do seem to compromise elements that made this deal distinctive. Marcus stood up. This is ridiculous. You're letting a subordinate employee dictate. Jennifer isn't a subordinate in this context, Patricia said firmly. She's a proxy holder with legitimate governance authority. And she's raising valid concerns about deal integrity. Marcus, your restructuring was not, well, thought out. It was impulsive. And it's put this entire project at risk. So what? She just gets to do whatever she wants. She gets to exercise the authority your father granted her. Which is exactly what that authority was designed for. Patricia looked at me. Jennifer, if we restore the original deal structure and restore your leadership of the project, will you proceed to closing? Yes. I can close this deal in 6 weeks with the original structure intact. Investors are committed. Municipal partners are supportive. Regulatory approvals are in place. It's ready to execute. What about Marcus's role? Marcus should focus on other projects. Ones where his approach is better suited. This deal requires relationship management. Long-term thinking. Those aren't his strengths. Marcus looked like he wanted to explode. I'm acting CEO. I'm not being removed from a deal because some VP with a grudge. Marcus, Patricia said, voice cutting. Stop. The board is making a decision. You can accept it professionally or you can make this more difficult. But the decision is being made regardless. She turned back to me. Jennifer, effective immediately, you're restored as lead executive on Riverside Infrastructure. Full authority to proceed as you see fit. Marcus will have no involvement. Thomas will be released from his advisory role. Do you accept? I accept. Then, let's reconvene with the investors and inform them we're proceeding with the original structure. The investor meeting resumed 30 minutes later. Patricia delivered the news. Original deal structure restored. Jennifer Blackwell back in leadership. Project proceeding as originally planned. David Morrison smiled. That's excellent news. Our investment commitment stands. We're ready to proceed to closing. The other investors agreed. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that. Everyone's shaking hands, confirming next steps. Acting like the previous 2 hours of chaos hadn't happened. Marcus left without speaking to anyone. Didn't shake hands. Didn't acknowledge the investors. Just walked out of the conference room and disappeared. Thomas approached me. Jennifer, I want to apologize. I should have done more due diligence on the original deal structure before agreeing to modify it. Marcus was very convincing about the changes being improvements. Marcus is good at being convincing. That's different from being right. I understand that now. Good luck with the closing. He left. And then it was just me, the board members, and the investors. Patricia pulled me aside. Jennifer, I need to ask, did you know this would happen? Did you set Marcus up? I protected myself 2 years ago when Robert recognized that Marcus might eventually have authority he wasn't qualified to handle. But I didn't force Marcus to restructure my deal. I didn't make him remove me from the project. Those were his choices. I just made sure I had leverage if those choices threatened work I'd built. Robert was smart too. Give you that proxy. Robert understood his son better than Marcus wanted to believe. The Riverside infrastructure deal closed 6 weeks later. $300 million in committed capital. All original provisions intact. Municipal partners satisfied. Environmental protections maintained. Long-term sustainability prioritized. It was the largest successful deal in Holloway Industries history. Robert returned to work 2 weeks after the closing. Still recovering, but healthy enough to resume CEO duties. One of his first actions was to remove Marcus as acting CEO and reassign him to business development. Back to his original role. No deal leadership. No operational authority. Marcus lasted another 3 months before resigning. Told people he was pursuing other opportunities. The truth was, he couldn't handle the humiliation of being demoted by his own father. I heard he started his own investment firm. Smaller scale. Projects where his aggressive style works better. I hope he's successful. But I'm glad he's not making decisions that affect my work anymore. Robert asked me to meet with him privately about a month after he returned. Jennifer, I need to thank you for protecting the Riverside deal, for not letting Marcus destroy what you built. That's what the proxy was for. Yes. But it took courage to use it. You knew it would create conflict. Knew it would damage my relationship with my son. You did it anyway because it was right. The deal was worth protecting. More than the deal. The principles the deal represented. That's what Marcus never understood. It's not just about closing transactions. It's about building things that matter. Things that last. He pulled out a document. The board has approved a new compensation structure for you. Significant equity stake in the company, promotion to executive vice president, and a seat on the board. I stared at the document. Robert, this is generous. More than generous. It's recognition of value. You've earned this. And Jennifer, I want you to know something. When I eventually do retire, I'm not handing this company to Marcus. I'm recommending you as my successor. The board has agreed. Robert, I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep building things that matter. That's all I ask. Today, I'm executive vice president and board member at Holloway Industries. Robert is still CEO, but transitioning to chairman. I'm being groomed for succession. Real succession this time. Based on merit and proven leadership. The proxy agreement is still active. Still filed in our corporate records. And I still have voting rights on any major deal I structure. But I've never needed to use it again. Because with Robert's support and board backing, nobody tries to undermine my work anymore. Marcus's attempted takeover taught everyone a valuable lesson. Authority has to be earned. Titles don't create competence. And sometimes, the most important protection you can have isn't a big office or an impressive title. Sometimes it's a single legal document filed away in corporate records. A document that ensures when someone tries to steal your work, you have the leverage to stop them. My name is Jennifer Blackwell. The CEO's son tried to boot me from my own $300 million deal and restructure it as his trophy project. So I pulled out the irrevocable proxy agreement his father had given me 2 years earlier and used it to block his takeover, restore the original deal, and ultimately end his executive career. Thanks for watching, corporate survivors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're the CEO's unqualified son trying to steal credit for other people's work. Then you're probably starting your third failed business venture and wondering why daddy's name isn't enough anymore. Good luck with that character development.